They were all going on a lovely summer holiday, hiding away in a paradise resort deep in the occupied regions of Ukraine. Russia's FSB enjoyed some sun, sand, and scheming. They thought they were being smart. Ukraine would never think to check a resort for Russian soldiers when there were so many places in the occupied territories that would seem more logical for the FSB to use. But the FSB was wrong. 100 FSB officers were hiding in a beach resort, but their vacation ended in hell. What happened when Ukraine found them was brutal and efficient. The location was Kherson, where dozens of FSB staff had set up a coordination center on the grounds of a resort in the oblast. Vehicles in their dozens were at the site, along with armed guards and checkpoints that controlled access. The FSB has also created underground shelters that surrounded their base, along with engineering barriers to prevent unauthorized personnel from gaining access. If the goal was to hide what was happening at the resort, the FSB wasn't doing a very good job. One of the most secretive organizations in Russia seemed intent on giving the game away. Perhaps they truly thought that Ukraine's powers of observation were so limited that they only needed to make minimal effort to hide their activity. Or worse for Russia, the FSB didn't care. Arrogant in their belief that they were safe, these FSB staffers may have thought that it didn't matter if there were signs of what they had turned the Kherson resort into. But they learned a harsh lesson. Boy, did they learn. Ukraine discovered the location of the resort and it unleashed a firestorm. Here's what we know. Ukraine decided to fight fire with fire. The FSB is Russia's federal security service. The perfect counter to the FSB is Ukraine's SBU, or Security Service of Ukraine. Like for like in duties, but not like for like in capabilities. The SBU assigned its notorious Alpha Special Operations Center to the task of destroying the FSB base. Alpha has a big reputation. According to a July 19th Defense Express report, this single unit of the SBU has recorded over 50,000 Russian troop casualties since the beginning of 2026. There are Russian soldiers to eliminate. This is the team that Ukraine wants to do it. Alpha didn't disappoint. Using 13 drones, the Alpha unit struck the FSB facility over and over. FSB officers who were sunning themselves at the resort felt the heat ramp right up as massive fires broke out all over the facility. This wasn't their idea of getting a tan. The resort was burnt to a crisp, and in a heartbeat, the FSB's subterfuge was all over. Speaking about the strike, the SBU was straightforward in its assessment. Special Forces of SBU's Alpha Special Operations Center successfully struck the coordination center and location of FSB officers, which was located in one of the boarding houses in the temporarily occupied Kherson region, it said in a Telegram post. Adding that the strike was conducted as part of a 40-day plan for the SBU outlined by President Volodymyr Zelenskyy a few weeks prior. We'll be coming back to that plan. It could be a game-changer in Ukraine. As for what the SBU managed to destroy, that remains the big question. We know that multiple large fires now rage at the Kherson resort. We also know how many FSB staffers the SBU believes were stationed at the resort base. Around 100 personnel and more than 70 vehicles were on the territory of the facility. The odds are high that many of those FSB staffers were casualties of the massive fires, along with vehicles being destroyed. However, Ukraine doesn't want to jump the gun on its reporting. The true scale of the damage done is still being assessed at the time of the creation of this video. What we know for sure is that Ukraine has just scored a devastating strike against the FSB, which is supposed to be filled with some of the elites of the Russian military and security services. We also know that Ukraine targeted a communications hub, which will have an impact on the front line in Kherson. It seems likely that the FSB is coordinating assaults on the front and arranging special missions via its resort hideaway. Not anymore. Sun and sand have been replaced by searing flames. We also have some footage of the strike, published by the SBU on X and Telegram. The video proves every claim made about the Alpha unit and its ruthless efficiency. The SBU didn't reveal the precise date of the strike or the exact location of the resort. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, suggests that geolocated footage shows that it was a region called Shazlivsteva, which is about 130 kilometers away from the west bank of the Dnipro River. What we do know, thanks to the footage, is that the FSB appears to have been practically defenseless at its hidden base. Several times over, we see the viewers shot by an FPV drone as that drone comes crashing down on part of the facility. Buildings are hit, massive explosions are recorded by reconnaissance drones flying high above the target zone. Often we see the flames of one destroyed target still raging as a drone zones in on the next. One snippet of footage even shows FSB personnel running for their lives as a drone comes in for the kill. It's unlikely those FSB staff survive. The final shot is the most revealing. A reconnaissance drone hovers above the battered site, filming footage of the aftermath of Ukraine's attack. We see flames everywhere. Entire buildings have erupted into infernos. There could be no hope of escape for FSB staffers stuck in those buildings. The resort has been transformed into a hellscape. Russia was going to twist a location that is supposed to bring joy to those who visit into another foul cog in Putin's infernal war machine. The SBU's Alpha unit was going to sap any remaining resemblance to a resort that the base once had. Nobody will be going on vacation in this patch of Kherson anymore. And now what's left of the FSB in the region has to find a new hidey hole. As for the drones that Ukraine used, the SBU hasn't revealed anything. However, we can speculate. Due to the scale of the damage caused and the size of the explosions with each successful strike, it seems likely that FP2 drones were the weapon of choice for the devastation of the FSB's hideout. If so, this drone would have been the perfect choice. Not quite an FPV drone, but also not quite the type of jet-powered drone that Ukraine uses to strike targets inside Russia. The FP2 is a middle strike behemoth that delivers explosive firepower to any target it strikes. Developed by Firepoint and in use since 2025, the FP2 is a fixed-wing drone that has a top speed of 205 km per hour and an operating range of about 200 km. Perfect for striking targets in the occupied territories beyond the front lines. The drone can carry a payload weighing up to 105 kilograms, and it also stays in the sky for up to 2.5 hours. Again, that's perfect. An hour or so is needed to get to its max operating range, and then plenty of time for adjustments before a target is struck. The Alpha unit is also very well versed in the use of these drones. A series of strikes conducted in February proves that, with those attacks seeing Alpha take out ammunition depots and command posts through the Russian rear. Those strikes are just a sample of the SBU's use of the FP2, so it makes sense that this well-known drone would be trusted to wreak havoc on the resort that the FSB used to create its communications base. Whatever the drone model used, it came in clutch in the strike against the FSB, and what the Alpha unit has just achieved has the potential to make a massive difference to the war in Ukraine. There are several reasons why, but before we dig into them, this is a quick reminder that you're watching The Military Show. If you're getting insight from our channel, remember to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you see more of our analysis of the latest Ukrainian strikes. First of the reasons we just touched on is something we mentioned earlier in the video. This strike against the FSB was part of the 40-day campaign of strikes that Zelenskyy announced in June that are designed to cripple Russia's military and economic potential. That announcement was made on June 25th, meaning we're only a little more than halfway through the strikes. That will worry Russia. Ukraine is taking out large FSB communications hubs just halfway through its campaign. The Kremlin will be very concerned about what the SBU has in store for the crescendo of this dangerous campaign. And when we say dangerous, we mean in the context of a lot of Russian bases and equipment being blown to pieces. Zelenskyy has assigned the SBU to carry out this 40-day campaign, which primarily uses drones to strike targets in the Russian rear. Ukraine even gave an early hint of the type of targets it would strike as part of the campaign, as Zelenskyy's announcement of it happened to coincide with attacks against an oil depot in Krasnodar Krai and strikes on a pair of oil refineries located in Ufa, which is in the Russian Republic of Bashkortostan. The message seems to be that if it's within range of SBU drones and it can be used to serve Putin's war goals, then it's a target. That's our assumption, at least. Ukraine has kept the precise targets it wants to hit and the tactics it will use a secret, meaning we only know that a strike was part of the 40-day campaign after the fact, and if Ukraine chooses to reveal the information. That's smart. Don't let Russia know what you're planning until FSB officers are on fire. Zelenskyy chose the SBU for a very specific reason when announcing this campaign. The SBU has been demonstrating the highest indicators of protecting Ukraine's positions at the front for several months in a row thanks to the use of drones of various types. The Special Operations Center, SOC Alpha, is the leader in terms of the results of destruction of personnel and equipment of the occupiers' forces, he said during his announcement. So the Alpha unit was already on top of the pile when it came to Ukraine's destructive potential against Russia. It's just added a massive scalp to its collection with the burning of the FSB's resort base. What we see in this campaign is twofold. First, Ukraine has developed such a varied stockpile of drones that almost nowhere in the Russian rear is safe, be the target in occupied Ukraine or Russia itself. For example, the Ufa refinery is about 1,400 kilometers away from Ukraine, and that's the target the SBU used to launch the 40-day campaign. Kherson is much closer, obviously, and that's the point. If it's a high-value target that Russia really needs, the SBU and the Alpha unit have a drone for the job. Second, the 40-day campaign shows us just how expansive Ukraine's intelligence network has become. Remember, the FSB was supposed to be hiding in the Kherson resort. It may not have been doing a good job of it, but it was supposed to be a secret base. The SBU found it and destroyed it. That's what it's been doing for weeks now, as target after target is struck. And beyond the targets themselves, Ukraine's intelligence is now so impressive that it's able to guide the drones it unleashes through the gaps in Russian air defenses to strike hundreds and sometimes thousands of kilometers deep into Russia. That's a game changer. It means Ukraine knows more than Russia realizes, and nothing inside Russia is safe. The entire point of this 40-day campaign is to damage Russia's military and economic potential, which is what the SBU has been doing. Militarily, the SBU strikes anything that has something to do with Russian command and coordination. That's what we've just seen in Kherson. A communications hub is down the drain, which will have a huge impact on Russia's frontline forces. Economically, we see the SBU striking refineries, oil depots, transport hubs, and shadow fleet tankers in the Black Sea and Sea of Azov. This is all oil and fuel that Russia can't export. And even if these products weren't meant to be sold abroad and were instead for domestic use, Russia loses money. Burning oil and fuel has to be replaced, and that doesn't come cheap. This type of pressure is starting to pay off. Ukraine's campaign against Russian fuel has led to shortages all over Russia and the occupied territories, particularly in Crimea, which is being increasingly isolated. The 40-day campaign is part of a pressure operation that is forcing Putin to look at what awaits his soldiers and his people in the winter. The fuel burns now, and Ukraine will follow up with strikes against energy infrastructure as the weather gets colder. There is an element of self-interest for Ukraine here too. Ukraine is a cold country in the winter, and Russia has taken advantage of that with its own strikes against the Ukrainian energy grid. The winter of 2025 was particularly difficult for Ukraine, as Russian strikes knocked out electricity and heating for huge swathes of the population, often for days at a time. For Ukraine, pressure now could pay off by forcing Putin to the table, perhaps preventing another difficult winter. Ukraine is leading into the advantages it has with its 40-day campaign. It's ahead of Russia technologically, as the emergence of AI-powered drones shows us. Drone-based air defense is also another advantage that Ukraine holds. That tech is coming to the fore now, and the SBU and especially the Alpha unit are showcasing how it can be used. So the continuation of the 40-day campaign is a major reason why this strike is a potential game-changer for Ukraine. Another lies in what Ukraine struck, the FSB. Officially, the FSB is a federal executive body that works to protect Russia itself. Issues of national security, counter-terrorism, and the protection of state borders all fall under the FSB's remit, as does the protection of Putin against the threats, both real and imagined, that Putin sees in the shadows. None of these duties involve attacking Ukraine, but the FSB has been doing just that, marking a departure from what the organization is supposed to be about. The reality of the FSB's work is much murkier than Russia claims. Thanks to an August 2022 report by Business Insider, we know that the FSB was preparing since at least 2019 for the full invasion of Ukraine, and it had quintupled in size between then and 2022. Protection of Russian interests isn't the real goal of the FSB. Aggression against Ukraine is, at least for as long as it takes for Russia to subjugate Ukraine. Since Putin invaded, the FSB has evolved from a civilian organization into a military one. King's College London points out that FSB officers won't be on the front lines. Instead, they engage in far more malevolent activities, often deep in the Ukrainian or Russian rear. In Ukraine, the FSB sends spies to uncover whatever they can to aid in Russia's war effort. In the Russian rear, both inside Russia and occupied Ukraine, FSB agents often engage in what the college calls the filtration of Ukrainian citizens. This involves identifying potential collaborators and attempting to remove anybody who could be a danger to Russia from the streets. The FSB engages in torture, data mining, and social media account inspection, all to learn as much as it can and to provide evidence of its false convictions against Ukrainian citizens. In short, the FSB has become a cancer within Ukraine. That's its job now, to be a malignant force that exists to hurt Ukraine rather than protect Russia. By taking out the FSB facility in Kherson, Ukraine has just struck a blow against one of the shadiest organizations that Russia has operating on its territory. Ukraine will be hoping that FSB officers were engulfed in the flames along with the buildings. Every officer down is a well-trained professional Russian spy who is very difficult to replace. Even if most of the 100 or so personnel at the Kherson resort survived, they've lost communications equipment and perhaps key data. This creates opportunities for Ukraine. Future strikes that the FSB may have once seen coming can now be carried out. Plans for assaults against Ukraine have gone up in smoke. For a while at least, the FSB has become a non-factor in Kherson. And speaking of this region, which has been partially occupied by Russia since the beginning of the invasion, Ukraine wants to limit the effectiveness of Russia in Kherson as much as possible. Stripping away the FSB presence in Kherson is a great step. It's also the latest in several underreported moves that Ukraine has been making to weaken Russia in Kherson. Reuters reported in late June that the puppet governor of Kherson, Vladimir Saldo, has claimed that the Russian-occupied territories in the region were now without power due to Ukraine's strikes against fuel and energy infrastructure. In its July 20th report on the state of Russia's offensive, the ISW said that neither Russian nor Ukrainian sources had reported any movement on the ground in Kherson. That's good for Ukraine. It suggests a stalemate was already in place before the attack on the FSB facility. Now that facility is done, Ukraine may have created opportunities for pushing back. At the very least, it's bought time to strengthen fortifications as Russian soldiers on the front panic and delay assaults due to communication with their FSB masters being cut off. Ultimately, what the SBU and its Alpha unit have just shown Russia is that it can't hide anything away from Ukraine. Whatever Russia tries to hide, Ukraine will always find. Around 100 FSB staff just learned that the hard way. They were enjoying themselves a nice little summer vacation in occupied Kherson, but they're at war, and Ukraine just sent them a lethal reminder of that fact. Ukraine has a habit of locating what Russia tries to hide and then sending drones to destroy it. The same thing happened in Donetsk just a few days before the Kherson strike. There, Russia was hiding a fuel depot in an abandoned concrete factory. Ukraine found it and unleashed Operation Hell to destroy it. Find out more by watching our video. And if you enjoyed this analysis of Ukraine's latest victory over Russia in the FSB, then make sure you subscribe to the Military Show to see what we have coming next. And thank you for watching.